Hello and welcome to Abandoned Project. I'm Joe. Now I'm going to continue reading my Abandoned Death of Krypton prologue. Continuing from the end of page 51. You're with me, Halfcarn, he informed the man before him, who had blonde hair, dark eyes, and a bearded chin, along with the muscled build that would have been better served in the military caste. An old friend of Laura Van. Rumor had it that Halfcarn had wanted to wed Lara, but had been shot down. Who knew if this was true? And if so, how it would affect his abilities in the field when being led by Lara's husband? Gather the rest of the 15th, 17th, 343rd, and 4th units and follow me. We've got an arrest to make. Halfcarn was a man he had only met in passing 2 years prior, and the two had been civil with one another, with Jor-El only finding out afterwards from none of the rumors regarding the man's previous crush on Lara. In truth, it hadn't bothered him, as he knew the man to be married now, and to have 2 sons, and to have quite the impressive service record. Ergo, the man was no threat to his marriage, in the eyes of the scientist. As per the head of House L's expectations, Halfcarn nodded his head and signaled a few others by hand to get to their air bikes, and to follow Jor-El, speaking to his comm on his right ear for all squads to follow and gather/unite around Jor-El. Your orders, sir. We're headed for Zod's. We have an arrest, or a series of arrests to be more specific, to make there. Jor-El replied to the man's question, as he took off without another word, determined to get this mess sorted out so that he could get back to the business of saving his people and planet. None of the guards questioned him. They had already received the report from their commander, and while some seemed skeptical, they were bred to obey and not to question. Such was the state of Krypton's people. They were born in test tubes, all but bred with certain qualities depending on the rank, and with all others left out. Only in rare exceptions did parents go with natural births, as Jor-El and Lara had done, with Kal-El, or decide to have the baby to be born with natural qualities without selecting them before birth, as was the case with Jor-El, Zor-El, and even Kara. It was said that Laura Van had been born similarly to Kal-El, but Jor-El doubted it. And if it was so, then that meant that even prigs could be born naturally. But such thoughts were not at the forefront of Jor-El's mind in that moment. All he could focus upon was the fact that Non was in danger, and Krypton would soon be potentially at the mercy of a madman with delusions of grandeur. Zod's home wasn't far, and thankfully, while several of the security officers apparently wished to blare and announce their presence, Jor-El was able to persuade them otherwise. No, we need stealth. Let me handle this, Jor-El stated to the captains with him as he took his vehicle down for a landing. The landing bay he found right next to the palatial estate was almost entirely empty, a sure sign that something was amiss. This worried him, because when he had left it for Argos, it had been filled to the brim, as it typically always was. It didn't take a genius to know what had happened. While Jor-El was busy organizing the security force, he had run out of time. Turning to Halfcarn, he told him, "Have one of the other captains check out the building and arrest any stragglers to take everything inside as evidence." "What about us, sir?" the slightly older man queried politely, after turning to one of his peers who eagerly stepped forward with a dozen men to begin the process of doing as ordered. "We need to hurry to the council building in order to head Zod off, before it's too late," Jor-El informed him grimly, fairly certain that time was running out. And much as he disliked and even hated Lorvan, he'd never forgive himself if anything were to happen to him, and even to Non. They would likely be killed alongside the rest of the council, should Zod have things his own way. And so it was time to get back on the vehicles, to head back the way they had come, with none of Jor-El's subordinates questioning him as he took point. Determined to save his planet from civil turmoil and war, he soon landed a short distance from the building, and immediately noticed the difference from almost 30 to 15 minutes prior. He had barely come down for a landing when he was already leaping off of the bike with his security force units right behind him. As he passed the gates, unholstered his blaster with one hand, found a target in a military uniform, and fired. Jor-El knew to fire blasters more due to sorry about that, a little tired. More due to recent experiences, escaping from deranged wild beasts, as 2 years ago he had been unable to fire even a taser properly. but because of repeated life or death situations, he had been forced to go to the targeting range to study them in order to defend himself. It was Sarai's brother who had known how to fire such weapons, but after the fourth attack, he had insisted everyone, including Jor-El, should learn how to wield blasters. And with Lara also insisting and signing herself up for a class, he had been all but dragged along. Now he was grateful for those lessons, and for no longer being all that much of a pacifist. Although, he would never describe it as a positive thing. From this day onwards, given how he had just utilized his skills to shoot a man through the side of his skull, the way the other military guard jumped and moved to raise his blaster made Jor-El's insides become both jittery and jelly all at once. But then the memory of the fear and adrenaline from all those battles with those beasts over the course of a year kicked in, with the scientist firing his next shot only to miss, and for Hathkarn to shot to punch through the man's face with the cleanness of a trained marksman. Impressed, Jor-El glanced behind him to find the other man giving him a small supporting grin and self-depreciating one, because of the gratitude in his current superior's eyes. Clearing his throat, Jor-El waved his free arm behind him, shouting to those behind him, "Onwards! Krypton depends on us!" And the reluctant roar and charge that carried him forward into the building felt as hot as the red sun, Rao of Krypton. Through the entrance they went, finding another 4 guards, and this time the hesitations and nervousness inside of Jor-El didn't last, as he picked off one of the women involved with Zod's coup, while Hathkarn and his men took out another 2. A quick glance down one hallway gave Jor-El another plan, as he turned to Hathkarn, whilst a few of their men escorted a surviving janitor out of the building. "Could you have one of our units circle back and enter through the left entrance? We could perhaps pincer some of Zod's men between us." "Yes, sir. I'll send Leo Var's unit." Hathkarn agreed at once, as he tapped his portable communicator and transmitted Jor-El's plan. "You don't have to agree with every decision, though." "I'm not, sir. Once you make a stupid decision, I'll let you know," Hathkarn retorted evenly, without too much emotion, beyond a somewhat strained grimace of worry. Evidently as aware of the circumstances and pressure that they were under, and as woefully untrained and unprepared for the task ahead of them as his superior, Jor-El didn't know whether to be comforted by this remark or not as he pushed onwards. Traditionally, the ruling council building was built in a manner akin to a labyrinth, with side rooms everywhere. It was a large building from which all of Krypton and Argos were administered, and where every single level of the planet's infrastructure could almost be found, which made navigating it whilst having a firefight a complete nightmare, with Jor-El and his unit encountering this unit or that one almost at every turn, with Jor-El expecting their comms to soon be shut down, given that Brainiac was with the enemy. Brainiac had yet to report their actual positions, which struck him as odd, in particular given that he could easily track them through their comms and other pieces of equipment. Given how all technology, including their blasters, had to get approval from Brainiac for extra energy, there was little they could have achieved without his knowledge, which meant he had to be scheming something, or at least semi-aware of how far they had gotten, and had likely already informed Zod, unless this was the most frightening notion of them all. He was playing both sides in the middle. What this meant was that he was playing each side against one another in order to remain on top with the winner, completely indifferent to their petty struggles for dominance of Krypton, something that sent a shiver up and down Jor-El's spine the longer he thought about it. And the more he dwelled on the possibility, the more the icy touch of certainty on that matter gripped his shriveling stomach and heart. Pressing around a corner, he nearly ran face first into a unit led by the insane Jaxer, who had approximately 4 hostages who all appeared to be technical support workers. "You!" he shouted, baffled, only to turn to one of his guards as he reached for his own holstered weapon. "Fire!" "You heard him, but be careful of hitting the hostages." Jor-El snapped at his own men, already lining up a shot and firing over the shoulder of one young lady, who screamed and dropped to the ground just as the man holding her from behind had dropped, dead. Between the 6 men that were with Jaxer and the 20 to 40 with his foe/rival, it was no contest. The first to recover from stupefaction having been Jor-El's unit, who already had their weapons at the ready, whilst Jaxer's unit only had 2 of them armed, and one of them was dropped from the word go. Having said that, it was almost it wasn't as simple as a straightforward victory, as Jor-El leaped to the side to take cover behind the building's corner at the same time that the sneaky Jaxer did, with 4 of Jor-El's unit falling, and all 6 of Jaxer's unit soon falling dead also. With the scientist terrified once again as he was in every battle, pushed onwards by the adrenaline given by his fear, as he fired 2 shots at random just as Hathkarn gave him a nod after a few minutes towards the corner, letting him know that he was with him, which was how the 2 of them soon found themselves rolling to the side, firing as they did so. Shots were fired around them, with all of Jor-El's shots failing to meet their mark. In the next few seconds, whereas his ally and subordinates having managed to hit their marks in some cases with ease, in others with some difficulty. Either way, between the numbers and the constant barrage of shots, 2 hostages were hit, with Jor-El's heart missing a beat from the horror at the idea that he may have been partially responsible for their injuries or deaths. As to the 6 other men, they were down for the count, with Jaxer no longer shooting around the corner. Seconds passed before he could react to the loss of all his men, with Jor-El keen to put an end to this conflict so he could have his men take care of the 2 former hostages, who were still injured. "Surrender, Jaxer! Surrender and let us end this!" he ordered hoarsely, as he signaled 2 men forward to try to seize the failed scientist, while he sent another 4 to pull the 2 hostages away from where they had fallen. "Never! Zod will change everything!" "Really? And would you die for him?" Hathkarn retorted amusedly, as he moved alongside the other 2, moving to seize the one-eyed man, to the displeasure of his superior, who hadn't actually ordered him forward. He was about to step forward to stop him, only to start moving towards the former hostages, with Jaxer brandishing his blaster at the nearest officer when he caught sight of the man, only to be kicked and knocked down by Hathkarn, who then kicked him in the ribs, with Jaxer crying out in pain, not paying the madman any mind, as he checked for pulses for the 2 injured hostages, only to find a faint pulse, while the 3rd one, who had managed to survive, was crying on the ground. Turning to his men, he barked out, "Hurry! Fetch some medics! These 2 need immediate medical attention, and stay with them!" The minute Jaxer was properly cuffed, struggling and growling, only to be forced to his feet and shoved forward so as to be questioned by Jor-El, who was told by another of his captains, "Sir, we must question him as to the location of Zod. Shall we begin?" "I won't tell you a thing! You'll soon be dead, and I free, fools!" Jaxer taunted them, with the security force growling threateningly at him, to which he remained utterly unimpressed. They could kill him, and he would not be afraid. The trouble was that the mad scientist was something of a fanatic, just as far too many of Zod's minions were. It was distressing, and it made things so much more complicated, since torture, as well as death, couldn't break their resolve. With the hostages in either no shape physically or mentally, as in the case of the 2 untouched ones, as they had found one of the hostages to be playing possum, this left Jor-El to figure out where to go from there. Trouble was, given how they were using another unit as a diversion, and how Jaxer likely had to report in, they were on limited time. What he needed was information. Now, he knew Zod wanted control and power, which meant he would need the primary council room under control. Regardless of what anyone thought or believed, he knew that this meant that Zod would want to be there, near where power was perceived to flow from. In reality, all power flowed from an altogether different chamber, one almost 50 stories downwards, and maintained by Brainiac for Brainiac. "Sir, why don't we ask him where his master is?" Hathkarn demanded impatiently, not seeing the point of overthinking the situation. "You'll never get to him!" "I have an idea, Hathkarn," Jor-El stated as he turned to the restrained Jaxer in order to ask of him, "Jaxer, would you say those who rule over us, our bosses, are soon going to share our fates?" It was a trick question, and Jaxer answered it fully, as well as answered an unanswered question regarding Zod's thinking and the relationship between him and Brainiac. "But of course, you fools!" "Good. Then he'll be in the ruling council chamber," Jor-El declared, turning to his men to signal them to follow him. "How can you tell?" "Simple. It is where Zod believes all power on the planet flows from," was the shrugged response, as Jor-El took a step towards the left hallway as the path curved in that direction, as well as going straight where Jaxer had come from. He had come from the science division. "What? No!" Jaxer panicked, confirming everyone's suspicions and affirming much of the admiration an appreciation that was beginning to be built in the eyes and hearts of those men who were tasked with working with Jor-El. And off they went, towards the heart of the building where the council would be and where Zod would wish to execute them. It lay at the heart of everything of Krypton, of her hopes and of her problems, but they had barely managed to make it down the hallway when there was a tremor beneath their feet, causing most of them to lose their footing. A tremor? One female officer wondered, just as Jor-El was about to ask that very same question. But soon the captain's comms went off on their headsets. "Sir, it wasn't a tremor, but one of the units blowing up a chunk of the building as part of a diversion," Karn reported, almost laughing, which further annoyed his temporary leader. "What? Who authorized that? I hope nobody was killed in that blast." "Sir, it could help us, given you said to distract the enemy. But I also didn't mean to imply risking innocent lives." "We're a little past that point in time, Jor-El," one of the other captains corrected him, which made Jor-El bite into his lower lip. He had killed, he had fought against others, and had even caused the deaths of one or two innocents himself in the past year, let alone over the course of this operation. And yet, he hated how he could not deny the unspoken charge of being squeamish about death and killing that the others had inflicted him with in that moment. He hated the very idea of killing fellow Kryptonians, of causing permanent damage, even though the planet had mere weeks left. He fought, and therefore, it wouldn't matter in the long run on the matter of permanent damage. Yet he also couldn't help but hate the very idea of it, and resist a certain hatred for Zod. If the man had only waited, they could have all escaped Krypton. They could have all found a new planet, a new world to colonize, to begin anew on. But the madman couldn't resist a coup, couldn't fight his own lust for power and wealth. It was what he was at his core, a thug, and that was the heart of the problem. Jor-El mused as he moved forward through the remainder of the hallways, this time running into less trouble than before. With Jor-El keen to reach the ruling council room as soon as possible, he expected Mala and Ursa to be there to wait for him outside the chambers and to ward off his attack, but neither was present. Neither were the countless other guardsmen and soldiers loyal to Zod, with the chamber doors unguarded and all but open to them, something which disturbed Jor-El and made him slow down. "Wait, why isn't it guarded?" he asked his captains, nervous and unsure of his current position and what to do next. "Who cares?" "I do," said another, who studied the door only to grimace and hold up one finger as if to say, "Wait 1 minute," to his current superior, and spoke hurriedly into his comm. Once he was done, he turned to Jor-El anxiously. "They left to reinforce the east wing. We'll have to hurry if we want to." In a heartbeat, his decision was made. Of the 3 units still with him, he had no need for all of them to be with him, as he ordered the other 2, "Go reinforce them, and hurry. Karn and I will retake the council chamber. Your courage and help will be noted and commended. Don't worry." "Thank you, sir, and may Rao smile upon you," was the instant and highly grateful reply, as Jor-El's unit further broke down in order to mop up and deal with Zod's insurrection. Between the pincer and the explosion, he hoped this would leave Zod's men defeated and unable to muster a proper defense anymore, and would further serve to demoralize and put an end to this fruitless conflict. "Let's go," he stated as he was the first one into the chamber, in order to make the arrest of the century, and put an end to Krypton's division. Zod was indeed there, with Mala absent, doubtlessly where the explosion took place, while Ursa was there gazing with intent wonder and joy as their soldiers held the ruling council room with all its members prisoner. Some looked fairly battered, others perfectly healthy, and detained behind a wall of guards with blaster rifles at the ready. In turn, Non lay on the ground with a bruised skull and a dazed look on his face, with a cut lip and what almost appeared to be a broken arm, with Ursa standing over him. In turn, Zod held Lorvan by the scruff of his dark robes that designated his rank as a senior member of the council. "Now, Lorvan, submit!" Zod bellowed furiously into Lorvan's battered face as the older Kryptonian spat back into his face. "I would sooner perish, you pitiful ingrate!" Lorvan snapped with equal venom as he glared back with enough force that he startled even his captor. "Then in that case, fire!" Jor-El ordered loudly in order to capture the attention of all in the chamber, with his men following his direction to fire upon those guarding the ruling council. "But take Zod and Ursa alive!" The fight was on, with Jor-El squeezing out a shot through the head of one of the guards, who dropped only to fire off another 4 shots aimed at the next one. The wild shots missed their marks almost each time. He would have wanted to fire a shot at Zod, but thankfully Hathkarn had seen to that by shooting at the man's wrist, only for the shot to graze it, causing the bearded general to let go of Lord Van, who dropped to the ground like a sack of potatoes. Soon Zod's men were beginning to feel overwhelmed, but the trouble soon began for Jor-El, as the general's superiorly trained men and the determined Ursa began to turn the tide. With a shriek of "Forward! Fire! Fight them off!" she soon turned the tide, as security officer after security officer began to fall back in order to take cover, all save for Jor-El, whose blaster soon ran out of ammo. With the scientist not in a possession of a clip, he was faced with the stark choice of retreating and begging for one, or charging forward. At the sight of Zod looking down at the shrinking Lord Van, apparently having already dismissed Jor-El's rescue attempt as having failed, he reached for his own blaster, strapped to his waist in order to put an end to Lara's father. He hated Lord Van. That had always been the case, especially after the ruling council member had attempted to take his wife and son from him. There was perhaps a time when Lord Van was tolerable, back when the man's wife was still alive, to mitigate his stupidity and snobbery. But that time was past, and nobody had more reason to hate him or want him dead than Jor-El. And yet, the thought of Lord Van dead, the thought of the loss Lara would suffer, of the pain she would endure, of the trauma it would cause her, of how Lord Van had coddled her when she was young, of how he still offered money for her comfort and Kal-El simply out of love and goodness of his heart, of how much Kal-El was blessed to have such a loyal, loving, and true grandfather, filled Jor-El with rage. True, he still hated the man, but he had always understood him, had always appreciated his love for his family. It was a quality that they shared, and the thought that should anything happen to him, Lord Van would be there to care for and love Lara and Kal-El, making sure that they had the very best, had enabled Jor-El to do what he had to on his trips and risk his life day in and day out. Thus, with a roar of "No!" he leaped forward without thinking, blaster still in hand, but barreling forward in order to tackle Zod, who fell back with a "oof" sound as the wind was knocked out of him. Stunned by this, and by Hathkarn covering for him by shooting Ursa in the shoulder, which caused her to be thrown back a little, inspired uncertainty in the guards. "Get off of me, Jor-El!" Zod roared. "Never!" Jor-El bellowed as he raised one hand to sock the older man in the jaw. Once, then twice, not even noticing that he had struck the general with the side of his blaster, which was in his left hand. Unfortunately, in his adrenaline, he had hardly paid attention to training, or to the logical fact that Zod knew more about self-defense than he, and could easily reverse their positions, which he soon demonstrated by flipping them over, and with a quick blow to Jor-El's face, only to wrap his fingers around his throat. "Really, El, this was futile. You should have stayed in your damn cubicle and left the leading and fighting to those more capable than you," Zod growled as he began to squeeze the life out of his foe, who gasped and wheezed. Unable to breathe, Jor-El looked about himself for help, looking all over as he instinctively tried to weasel a finger or two between the firm grip of his enemy and his throat futilely. Searching around him, he felt around only to feel something metallic next to him. Confused, he glanced out of the corner of his eye to his left, even as his periphery began to go dark, a sure sign of the effect that Zod's act of strangulation was having upon him. It was Zod's blaster, the one he had dropped when Jor-El had tackled him off of Lord Van. "Jor-El!" Lord Van murmured from behind Zod. Moved by the courage of his hated son-in-law, he never would have previously believed it possible for the man Lara had chosen to try to rescue him in such a manner. It was so noble. Now, I'm going to stop there. Actually, you know what? I'll keep going a little bit longer. He had hated Jor-El for so long, reviled him for taking away his daughter, and refusing to acknowledge the effect his doomsday prophecies would have upon Kal-El's future, with Lord Van having striven to gain custody of Lara and Kal-El, and yet Jor-El would willingly give up his life for him? It was enough to make Lord Van ashamed of himself. He had done all in his power to ruin the younger man, his reputation and position, yet he hadn't hesitated for a single heartbeat to try to rescue him, to do all in his power to keep the old man alive. Heck, he had seemed infuriated beyond reason by the notion. And now I'm actually genuinely going to leave you off there at page 61. So if you like this video, like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. And hit that notification bell.